Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
23 and a half minutes after 7 o'clock, we turn our attention now to the ongoing works of CARICOM. And as you know, every Monday we have our conversations on CARICOM with Ambassador David Comissiong, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM. Good morning to you, Ambassador.
Good morning, Pearson.
Good to see you.
Christmas morning.
Yes, indeed. 5 days away from December 25th. Are you excited, sir?
Well, I had perhaps the greatest Christmas gift last night and Saturday night at
No, I'm curious.
the Golden Square Freedom Park.
What happened?
Stefan Walcott, 1688 Collective,
Wow.
Marlon Legal, Voice Project, Dance
Wow.
in Africa, choreographed by Aisha Comissiong, doing Handel's Caribbean Messiah in Golden Square. You can't get it better than that.
Jeez, I missed it. I feel like beating
It's gonna
myself
be on
right
CBC
now.
TV. It's going to be on CBC TV on
Okay.
Christmas Eve.
Good. So I look to see it for real. I mean, those are some excellent Barbadians in one space in the Freedom Park, as a matter of fact, showcasing the best of who we are. I'm already excited about this for real. I honestly am. But you know, just recently, Prime Minister MOTTLEY had a chance, and as we know, she will sock it to you if she has to sock it to you. She had a chance to address the United Nations as we continue our look at reparations and making some very strident calls on behalf of CARICOM. I'm going to play a little bit of it, her speech, and then right after we'll continue talking. So take a look at this, folks, our Prime Minister's address to the United Nations.
While we await word from our European colleagues in relation to our demands for measures to repair the damage done to our domestic societies and nations, we also want to serve notice that there is an associated and counterpart international dimension to reparatory justice that we are also seeking. More and more, we have come to realize that the world's currently existing international economic and political order has its roots in and grew out of centuries of criminal enslavement of African people, of discrimination and racism, and that it is a system in which the formerly enslaved and colonized nations and people of this world, like those of us in Caribbean and Africa and parts of Asia, have been inserted in a structurally subordinate and exploitative manner. The nations that experience the brunt of those centuries of enslavement and colonial exploitation must therefore set out, collectively I might add, to achieve a reparative restructuring of the international institutions, inclusive of the United Nations Security Council, inclusive of the United Nations, inclusive of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, because all of these institutions were established and formed before many of our nations even had the right to speak for ourselves as independent nations. It is critical that these institutions re-examine their structure and their procedures if we are to give equity and opportunity to those of us that were the victims of being colonially exploited territories at the time of the formation of these institutions. We must also set out to restructure the inequitable terms of international trade and the currently existing equally inequitable mechanisms and rules of international finance and economic governance. And my friends, just as we demand compensation for historical wrongs and for the present-day consequences of those wrongs, we must likewise demand and achieve compensation for the climate injustice that we have been and continue to be subjected to. We should recognize that one of the components of the reparatory justice plan that is owed to us is the sustainable development practices that we insist must be installed and pursued globally. We should insist that the UN SDGs must be concretized in the form of a revitalized global partnership in the spirit of global solidarity and in support of a truly universal and transformative global development agenda. Similarly, the same climate crisis and climate injustice of which I just spoke needs to ensure that a large portion of the money that is available for adaptation going forward will be put for the use of small island developing states.
Telling it as it is, right there to their face. What a powerful speech, what a very poignant messages as well.
Yeah, Pearson, what I want to bring home is that Prime Minister MOTTLEY, as the Prime Minister with lead responsibility in CARICOM for reparations, has actually established a new front in CARICOM's reparation campaign. The CARICOM reparation campaign started in 2013, and it was all about the Caribbean nations making a demand of the European powers that engaged in enslavement and colonial domination in the Caribbean for a package of developmental programs to deal with the damage done to our domestic societies. But since Prime Minister Mottley has come on the scene, she has also signaled that in addition to that, that there's an international dimension to reparations. And you just heard her outline it there, where she's speaking about reforming the international institutions, reforming the terms of trade that lock countries like the Caribbean into being either producers of raw materials or producers of low technology goods and services. The reform in how, at a global level, finance and economic governance is done. All of this blacklisting, for example, of our countries where we have no say in the institutions that make these decisions to blacklist. So she is targeting all of that. And I think it's important that we understand this, because I have heard some of our people questioning when they see Prime Minister Mottley on the international stage, oh, she's just there to show off. Well, no. It's not about showing off. She recognizes that we in countries like Barbados, we can do a lot for ourselves locally, but there's only so much we can do locally. There's also that international dimension that we need to target and to ensure that it is more supportive of us. And that is what she's targeting. So when you see her at COP26, it's not just about taking the international stage to show off. It is about trying to ensure that Barbados gets its share of the $100 billion US per year that developed countries are supposed to put on the table for countries that suffer from the climate crisis, like Barbados. When you see her at the IMF, chairing the IMF and World Bank Development Committee, it's not about just being there to show off. It is about being there to convince these countries, these institutions, that, for example, as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the plight that small countries like Barbados have had to face, that the IMF should issue a new round of special drawing rights. Those special drawing rights are assets that the IMF can give to countries to bolster their international reserves. And we were successful in getting the IMF, in response to COVID, to issue 650 billion new special drawing rights in August of this year. As a result of that, Barbados was allocated $90.5 million US in new special drawing rights. That means our foreign exchange was bolstered by $90.5 million US. So this is about her advocacy on the international stage and framing it within the context of reparations, of justice for countries like Barbados that were subjected to centuries of enslavement and colonial exploitation, and that were then inserted in this international system in a very disadvantaged situation. That campaign is all about bringing real benefits and resources to Barbados and other Caribbean countries.
And that's because a lot of these international agencies were formed out of this whole plundering of the islands of the Caribbean, as well, and other small island developing states. So naturally, that's the appeal to them, the IMF, the United Nations, and all of these global agencies that have used and leveraged their power to further oppress those of us from the region.
Yeah. When the UN was set up in 1945, Barbados was still a colony. Mm-hmm. Virtually all of the African countries were still colonies. So the big powers of the day they took control of these institutions and they privileged themselves. So, for example, the UN Security Council, there's no black African or Caribbean nation as a permanent member of that Security Council. The way the IMF and World Bank functions, it is the European powers that dominate, the management and the decision making. The way the OECD functions, the way the European Union Commission functions and blacklisting our countries. We don't even have a seat at the table. So it is all about recognizing that we are owed fairness and justice, and and she's going about it, and it is central to our developmental program, because yes, we can do so much for ourselves, but we need that supportive international environment. So I'll give you another example. Barbados has been locked out of grant financing and concessional financing by the international institutions, the World Bank and the IMF and so forth, because they have said, well, based on GDP, gross domestic product, we are a middle income country. And so it has meant that the support that we should have been getting from the international environment, we are not getting. And we are targeting that as well. So she is trying to pilot this idea of a universal vulnerability index to replace GDP. And when you have a universal vulnerability index, you look at Barbados and you say, but it's a small island that has come out of a colonial background of being plundered. It exists in the Caribbean. It's on the front line of the climate crisis. It faces hurricanes. It faces all kinds of vulnerabilities. This country is entitled to concessional financing and grant financing. Similarly, when Barbados hosted UNCTAD and put itself in the position to become president of UNCTAD, what Prime Minister Mottley and the Barbados government has in mind is using UNCTAD to reshape that international trade and development environment, the same environment that has, because of the international terms of trade, has locked us into this kind of subordinate position of being this locations for low technology goods and services. And so it is about reshaping the international environment so that countries like ours can be treated in a more just, a more supportive manner, and we can get access to the resources we need to build the kind of societies that we are entitled to. We're entitled to societies on par with those of Western Europe in terms of education and healthcare and all of the other amenities. So I just think it's important that Barbadians be aware that this is an important part of our diplomacy, and it has direct implications for our standard of living here on the island, and it comes out of the reparations idea. It is in fact adding a new dimension to the CARICOM reparations campaign.
There's a chipping away of centuries-old block or misunderstanding of who we are as a region, and that is what all part of that effort as well. In order to see the flow of the funding as a consequence of our being repaired, there has to be a chipping away, and they only know what they know. We have to help them understand who we are and to learn who we are so that they can understand and appreciate why we are chipping away at this old block the way that we're chipping away. But the Prime Minister is not just advocating on behalf of Barbados alone, she's advocating on behalf of the CARICOM. And so, I know we've looked at it from time to time, the CARICOM Reparation Manifesto. Where do we go now? There's a chipping, but where do we go now? How do we get this axe to fall even harder so that we begin to crack some of those difficult situations?
Yes, well, another thing that people would have noticed is the Prime Minister investing a lot of time and energy in reaching out to the African continent and building a partnership and trying to build a partnership with Africa. I mean, Barbados has established 2 embassies on the African continent, in Ghana and Kenya. But again, this is part of the reparations strategy as well, because CARICOM has determined that the next phase in our reparations campaign has to be to reach out to Africa, to invite African countries and the AU, the African Union, to come on board with us in this reparations effort. Because, Africa is a continent of 1.3 billion people, some 53, 54 governments and nation states. So Africa has a weight. Africa brings a weight that the Caribbean community cannot bring. I mean, we are much smaller. But if we put the two together, we become so much more dynamic. And so that's the next phase, Pearson, because we recognize that we really have to make this reparations claim into an international cause celeb. We have to tell our story to the world. We have to make the world aware of the centuries of looting and siphoning off of our resources and the great injustice that was done to us. And yes, I think we are a miracle. I mean, we have been able to virtually carry out a miraculous development to bring countries like Barbados to where we are today. But that has been a tribute to the tremendous effort and discipline of the masses of the Barbadian people. But we know that really and truly we should be much more advanced. But unfortunately, for generations, our ancestors, all of the fruits of their labor, they never got to appropriate, they never got to keep. They were all siphoned off to European families and companies and institutions, and ultimately to the capitals of Europe. And so yes, that is what it's all about.
Yes.
It's not about bitterness or division, but it's about justice. It's about saying, look, these are the facts. Let us create a just and sustainable future. And that's why the Prime Minister once again was stressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, an end to poverty, an end to hunger, proper health care, proper living standards for the people of the world. And she's saying to Europe and those countries that benefited from those centuries of enslavement and siphoning off of our resources, look, let us come together in a new developmental partnership to create this new world of justice for all of us.
I hope I'm alive when finally the region has been emancipated mentally and we see ourselves to be as strong and equal to anyone else anywhere. Then our true power is shown and seen. Ambassador Comissiong, we got to leave it there. I see you smile because I know you want to add to that.
I was just going to say that what we saw last night at Golden Square,
yes,
that Handel's Caribbean Messiah, featuring the music of Barbados and Jamaica and Trinidad and Cuba and
beautiful.
Haiti, the salsa, and that was our Caribbean civilization, its power and its beauty on display. So
Indeed.
Just fitting in with your closing point and tying it to how we celebrate our Christmas season, exploring our beauty as a Caribbean civilization.
Oh boy, I can't wait for that. I want to be around for that. Thank you so much, Ambassador Comissiong, as always, for joining us and citing us while you're educating us about what's happening in CARICOM and reminding us of each of us we need to play our part by either lending support or adding our voice in a very significant way as well towards the change we want to see. Thank you, Ambassador.
My pleasure, Pearson. Thanks.
There we go. Morning Barbados will continue right after this.
Morning, morning, morning.